Welcome to Tools for Liberty. This is episode 7. I'm Amanda Sparrow and this is Dylan Proctor. And today we are filming at the Parthenon in Centennial Park in Nashville, Tennessee.
So today we're going to do things a little bit differently. Our terms, our topic, and our culture discussion, they're all going to be mixed together quite a bit. So we're going to start off with two terms today, and that's beauty and art. But I'd like to point out that today, instead of really giving a definition, these are a bit more of a commentary that are pulled out of some ancient thoughts that we have. So as far as beauty goes, this is something that we oftentimes may have some sort of definition. A lot of times it's easier for people to recognize beauty than to really have a good coherent definition of it. But I want us to think of beauty with this simple phrase today. Beauty is interpreting truth. Now I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about it very carefully and keep that close to your mind today as you listen to everything we share. Beauty is interpreting truth. Now I didn't say it's interpreting truth well or interpreting truth poorly, but it's just the process by which truth is interpreted. Now art is another very important thing for us to discuss as we're here at the Parthenon. And I want us to realize that art is something that is connected to the truth as was understood in the ancient world. Back in the ancient philosophers, they understood that art had some connection to some sort of truth that was transcendent, perhaps even divine, but there was a connection between art and truth. So let's go ahead and get into our topic today.
So as you can guess, our topic is about art and beauty and truth. And so we are going to go into that. And often when we talk about that conversation and why in the world even talk about art, this podcast is a lot about logic and some very serious issues that people are encountering in our world. And so art may seem frivolous, but it does have a great connection with life. And so we get to the question of, does art imitate life or does life imitate art?
All right, so this is a really important thought to start off with. So this is something that goes all the way back to Aristotle and even Plato, the idea of art imitating life. But really, Fyodor Dostoevsky, who was a philosopher, sort of a author from the 19th century, he made the statement, at first, art will imitate life, then life will imitate art, and then life will find its very existence from the art. So this is something which is really interesting because in the ancient world, people understood there was a connection between art and truth. And by truth, we just mean sort of the practical truth, like there's a certain form that human beings follow, and just that truth in reality. So let's talk a little bit about how art has evolved.
So how did we get here, and how do we get to all these varied forms of art and expressions of truth and beauty? And sometimes, as Dylan had mentioned earlier, sometimes they're bad interpretations or expressions of truth and beauty. One of kind of a key pivotal point in the history of art is the Impressionism, and then later you have the Post-Impressionists. And it is this movement that challenged the status quo of how art was done. And the artists that exemplified this they looked at the schools and kind of the guilds that promoted art. And they're like, we want to do it differently and want to express some things that are just a little bit outside of the norm. And throughout the years, this yearning to move beyond normal limits has produced great works of art, literature, and music. However, it has also produced kind of a pathology of this movement, has produced an ideology that favors deconstructionism. And for sure, art should be challenging, not only for the artist who's producing that work, whether it be a painting or a sculpture or music or a play or whatever it may be. It should be challenging for them to look at their world and to find these connections between truth and beauty. But it should also be challenging for the audience or whoever is watching or looking at this art. However, there seems to be this movement of just challenging for the sake of challenging and to kind of add to the noise of shock and awe.
Yeah, so Amanda's exactly right. Historically, art has always had some aim, and a lot of times art did challenge the status quo, but it wasn't just challenging it for the sake of challenging it. It was because there was something wrong with the status quo within the world. Something about the people who were really in control of culture, who were in control of society, the people who had the loudest voices of influence were doing something which was separated from that which was truth, that which was transcendent, and that which was good for the common person. So art sometimes would challenge the status quo to reflect the disparity between truth and reality. And the artist would try to do something to convey sort of this transcendence between reality and then the way that we interact with the world around us, the difference between our perception and then the way that things objectively sort of are. So art sometimes challenged the status quo, but it wasn't for this arbitrary or random purpose of just doing it. It was always for the purpose of pointing back towards the truth and the good.
And as we continue kind of on the conversation of shock and awe and challenging or just doing anything for the sake of doing it without any kind of intention or goal or purpose, is that if we look around in our culture today, there seems to be a removal of discipline and talent. This is not unique to the art world or to the practice or discipline of art, but we can see it in many aspects of our lives and in our culture and the workings of people around us. It is much easier to attain just kind of this simple shock factor than it is to challenge ourselves and others to be disciplined and talented and to learn and to grow in our art, whatever that may be.
So it's something really worth pointing out that there is a difference between sort of how the ancients understood art and how sort of what she would describe earlier as the impressionist, and then sort of you get post-impressionism, and we have modernism and sort of postmodernism ways of thinking. Really, we can trace all of this to in the 19th century. Not only did you have Dostoevsky making sort of his claims about how people interacted with art, which we'll get to that on another episode, but also Oscar Wilde really had this important statement, and he said that the true purpose of art is that to lie. Really, he said, instead of portraying truth and reality, and this is sort of a quote of Oscar Wilde, he would say, lying, the telling of beautiful untrue things, is the proper aim of art. Oscar Wilde really seen the evolution away from trying to instead of art imitating life, but really that life itself should imitate art, because with the artist they could create something which was more than just the world around them. They could create beautiful things, which although they were untrue, there was still some sort of beauty that he claimed that was connected to it, which is a very different line of thinking than the beauty that the ancients had. The ancients really understood that if it was beautiful, it was because it was interpreting truth in a very meaningful way. However, by the time you get the thinkers of sort of Oscar Wilde and those in the 19th century, you get this idea that art should not simply tell the truth. It should instead be purposefully lying. That art should be the telling of beautiful, untrue things.
So yes, we have these kind of conflicting and others who would maybe fill in kind of the in-betweens of these goals of art. We then have to ask the question, what is the desired result of art? One of the things as we look into the history of art and even art in our contemporary times is that art is often tied to social and political movements. With that, art has done much to inspire and to challenge. And so there has been a goal, a purpose with lots of art movements to look not just only into paintings or sculptures, but to be commentators on what is happening in the world around them and how can we move to a place that is better? How can we move towards something, whether it is a regime that is oppressing or rules that constrict? How can we go beyond this? And what do the new rules or the new kind of structure, what does that look like? And oftentimes, though, at the same time, we have movements of art that kind of deconstruct all the things, that the structures and the powers in the world around them, but then offer nothing in replace of them. And so we see lots of art movements that are great at saying, okay, our aim is simply to deconstruct, and there's nothing kind of productive or constructive that moves out through that. In talking about all this, often we can think about, as we look at art, is does every piece of art have to have some great grand purpose or connection to truth? And the truth is, I think there can be pieces of art that are simply beautiful or that are simply appealing to the eye, I guess is a better word to use since we're talking about beauty being attached to truth. And there can be books, there can be movies, there can be music that is simply just fun and it has no kind of grander purpose, and that's okay. But as we look at art and how it challenges us and moves us, we have to then realize some pieces are simply going to be appealing, some of it's just going to be fun, and then others may be more important, but we have to be, I think, careful in tying definitions or purpose to things, maybe more or less than really it is intended or should do.
Yeah, and that's really, really interesting because in our world today, there's always this tension that happens that says, do we let art lead and develop how we live our lives, or does we produce art which is a reflection of life? So this is sort of the sort of poles of our discussion today. Does art reflect life, or does life reflect art? And in the ancient world, people really understood that there was this great responsibility that was on the artist, that they should convey a message, whether it be something extraordinarily deep or whether it be something that is more casually entertaining. But the thing was, they always wanted to express a message, but it was never at the cost of excellence. There would always be excellence, no matter what you were doing, no matter whether it was something that was a comedy or whether it was something that was more dramatic, something that was very deep, and maybe even if something that was a sculpture, whether it was even poetry. There was always this understanding that you had to pursue excellence in everything you were doing because you wanted the audience, the viewer, the one who was listening to the art you were presenting, to be inspired by it. And so the question is, many in our modern world, they want life to imitate art. We see this people, they look at the television, they look at movies, and they say, well, I want to live like that, even though it's very unrealistic representation of the world. Those who were writing the things may have not seen a necessity to incorporate real world problems, all the variables you would get in real life. But one of the problems that we really get in our modern era is that so many artists want to redefine truth as they see fit. And they use art as something which is manipulative, something which is, what the ancients would call lying. And we see this a lot of times in the form of propaganda. If we look throughout the horrors which happened in the 20th century, we can see a lot of propaganda that came out which really was used not in sort of this light-hearted thing, something like just turning on the television to enjoy a TV program. It was something that was much broader than that. They realized that art could very completely shape the way that people understood the world around them. So this is the sort of push and pull we have. But before we go any further today, we're actually going to break things up. We have some guests we're going to have on today. Their names are Ian and Barbara. And we're going to go visit them. They're actually from the ancient world, and they're going to share with us some of their thoughts on art from a long time ago.
Well, I'm Barbara from the ancient world, and today I'm sitting here contemplating on truth, beauty, and art. And I think my friend here has come. Will you come and sit with me as we talk?
Yes, I will, Barbara.
So, Ian, you are an artist, no doubt?
Yes, I am an artist.
And tell me, an artist, what is the goal or point of being an artist? Are you pursuing truth and beauty?
Yes. Interpreting truth is of the utmost importance for the artist. The artist must interpret truth, something which is transcendent, so that the common person can reach towards this truth. I myself do not see the truth, but I interpret the truth so that others can see it.
When you talk about interpretation, then is there good interpreters, bad interpreters, and then good interpretations and bad interpretations?
Yes, not all art is a good interpretation of the truth. Some art is a good interpretation of the truth, and some art is a bad interpretation of the truth.
So then what should be the pursuit of art?
Well, the purpose the artist should do is to not be manipulative, but instead the artist should truly pursue with the utmost of labor to find the truth and then interpret it in such a way that people can see it. Because you see, an artist can be lying, but an artist can also be honest. I myself, I prefer to be honest.
Well, thank you, Ian, for that. And is there any other comments you would like to add to that, to what is art and beauty and truth?
Art is something which is a very, very careful practice. The poets, they understand the truth, and if I am to interpret the poet, then I must understand the mind of the poet. I must understand something about the truth in order to be able to interpret it. It is so important that we stick to our rigor when we interpret the truth.
It's interesting. It's like the like magnets and then rings that you can connect to them, that they have a connection, that even the rings, the metal rings that you connect to a magnet, begin to relay then that magnetism on. And so as you continue, as you interpret the poets, and the poets are interpreting and seeking truth, that when we can continue this story or this dialogue of what truth and beauty is.
Yes, beauty must always be connected to truth. Beauty truly is the interpretation of truth. As we interpret truth, we find beauty in that, and the closer we get to truth, the more beautiful things are. The better the art is, the closer it is to truth.
Well, thank you for this conversation. I think that will be helpful in understanding art and beauty.
Well, thank you for discussing with me, Barbara, and I will see you later.
See ya. All right, so welcome back. I hope you enjoyed our interview with our two guests. And so we're going to just kind of recap what was happening in that section and also in our general conversation. So we talked about this movement from an ancient view of seeing art as a pursuit and a connection with truth and beauty. And then as we move into the Impressionist era, there's this challenging that happens. And even in today's modern culture, there's been this removal of discipline and structure for just simply creating your own reality or your own narrative. And so we have seen these kind of almost contradictory or conflicting aims of what art should really be and how it should pursue truth, and then how it should interpret it and relay it to the person who is watching or listening or observing art.
Okay, so the question I have for you, because of course this is a program very much focused around the idea of critical thinking. The question I have for you is you as an individual, you have to choose. Does worship something in the church that is art? I realize that one may not even be part of the church, so let me broaden that question out a little bit. Do you want life to imitate art, or do you want art to imitate life? Do we want the art that exists around us to be a pursuit of the excellence, to be a pursuit of that which is true, to be a reflection on the very difficult and sometimes complex things in reality, or do we want it to be something which is cheap and easily obtained? Now back to the idea of worship and art. This is a really big question for those who are part of the church. Is worship art? At the university I went to for undergraduate, there was even a degree that was called worship arts, and this is a really big question, especially if we look at the difference between how the ancients understood art and how sort of people do now, especially in sort of the postmodern era we live in. Because if art is something which comes first and then life imitates it, well, how does that play into worship? Does worship, which is in the church, does worship come out of truth first? Does it first seek to reach to God? Or is it something that is cheap, and worship seeks to be easily obtained as a sensation first, and then later, truth, theology, and even God is forced into it secondarily? So this is something which is a huge question for the church. You know, one of the things I remember a couple of professors talking about when I was even in undergrad, and now I still hear various ministers talk about it, the idea that it used to be that songs and our hymnals were written by theologians, and they were secondarily songwriters. They were primarily theologians, and they wrote songs focused around theology. And now we have the exact opposite. We have people who are songwriters, not theologians, first and foremost writing songs, and they sort of secondarily put words of theology in there that fit. So the question we have as the church is, does worship exist as an art? And if it is an art, does it first and foremost, does it seek the truth? Does it seek God first? Or is that its second purpose? Is it first and foremost something cheap, something that requires no discipline or talent, and it's something which is just quick and easily obtained? And then after we obtain the sensation, we then sort of force truth and even God into it secondarily. This is a big question for us. So you as an individual, you must decide which stance that you want to be prevalent in your life. Do you want to pursue truth first and foremost? Or do you want to pursue something which is sort of superficially beautiful, even though it doesn't interpret truth very well? This is a very important question, because the ancients understood that truth, that the beauty in art was this interpretation of some transcendent truth that was even almost divine. It was people looking for something which is bigger than the world around them. You look at some of the people who used to do sculptures, and they would spend times, they would even go to what we would now call a morgue and examine corpses and examine the sort of human form so they could know it intimately. So that way when they would do sculptures, they would be able to properly put expressions on people. They could obtain this sort of pure human form, even though no real person may look like that human form. See, today we say, well, we don't want to pursue something which no one can attain, but in the ancient world they said this is what we all should look forward to. Even if we can never get there, we understand this is sort of something divine and transcendent about the truth. But it's much more than that. It was about the truth of how the whole world works, how emotions work, how the objective reality of life works, and how we overcome the sufferings in our world. Do we want our art, do we want our worship to imitate truth first? To be an interpretation of truth, to be a opening up of a door and peering to the deep depths of truth? Or do we want to go for something which is cheap and easily attained and then force sort of truth onto it? So this is a very important question. I want you to think about that and use critical thinking as you ponder this. Do we want to live in a world where we primarily see art imitating truth and art imitating life? Or do we want to live in a world where it's the other way around, where life exists, where life is an imitation merely of the arts around us? It's a very big question. So if anyone wants to follow some of the material we have to read along with this, we have an article discussing some of Oscar Wilde's understandings as well as Plato's Ion. You may not notice this, but when you heard from Barbara and Ian earlier, you're actually hearing from Greek philosophers. We sort of did a simple adaptation of Plato's Ion, and we had the two characters representing Aristotle and Ion from the tale there. And that's something which is free on Amazon. We're going to put a link to that into the description or comment section, depending on which site you're viewing this from. And I do ask you to please like and share our videos if you enjoyed what you've seen today. Please share it with others. Please subscribe to our podcast. We're on SoundCloud now. We're on Castbox. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're on a lot of different platforms. We're on Twitter as well. Please enjoy, like, and share, and subscribe to all that we're doing. And I hope you all have a blessed day.